All right, everybody. In this video, we're going to break down the hearing today in Copa v. Wright. This is the injunction hearing, the cost hearing, the final hearing that the court's going to hear before Judge Mehl. And I'm going to break it down in like an XTownHall style, where it's going to be live and people can ask questions, comment, and I've got some all-star panel today of people that are going to be chiming in on the case and the subject matter. So stay tuned to the end of this video, and I'm going to be recording it live and then putting it out. Yeah. Basically, you'll get to find out exactly like what's on the court's mind and where the fate lies, at least in a kind of a town hall style from the people, what the people think where the fate lies with Dr. Wright, and some of the discussions back and forth that people think where it should go or where it's going to go, and whether or not he's going to appeal, or does he have grounds to appeal? What's the effect of it if he appeals, or is he just not going to appeal? Is it going to go away? Is he going to end up behind bars? People have a lot of, and want to hear, people's perspective on this. So stay tuned. It should be a fun little town hall. Stay tuned, and I'll start here in a moment. All right, what's up? All right, what's up, everybody? It's a great day. This is Gavin Mehl. We're gonna do a XTownHall today regarding the Copa v. Wright injunction hearing. This is the equitable relief hearing today, and run it a little bit differently than we did before in the mastermind call. More of a like kind of a free-flowing style. Just to kind of recap, let me just do an introduction here as to what happened in the courtroom today. I'll give you guys a summary. And so just for those who haven't really been following this case, this is a case, it's a significant case in history because of what happened to, ultimately the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto, the guy who created Bitcoin, was to be determined or not to be determined at the outcome of this case. And so it was to be determined that Justice Miller determined that Craig Wright was not that person who wrote the white paper or who created the Bitcoin system. And he was also determined that he was not basically he determined four things: was not the creator of the Bitcoin system, was not the author of the white paper, was not and did not have a copyright over the protocol, or did not control over the protocol. So it was four things in a declaration that he ordered. Now, what was determined today was that the equitable relief, Copa wants a worldwide freezing order on Dr. Wright for things that he says about Satoshi Nakamoto. They also want they want relief in costs, fees, attorney's fees, and additional equitable relief, which is not necessarily on the oral argument. It's more in the pleading. So we don't have every single piece of paper that they have, but I will give you a summary. The hearing today, and then the hearing resulted with Judge Miller thanking everybody for returning. He felt he had a better understanding of both arguments since last Friday. So there was an injunction hearing last Friday that he had, and Wright wasn't there at either one. But the injunction hearing last Friday, that Miller didn't rule, and he continued things today. Now, so then he basically went through all the arguments. He said there were some disagreements over the percentages of agreed costs that Craig Wright should pay. Copa's side was seeking like 90%, while Shoesmith's side wanted a lower percentage. Copa's side argued that the costs were reasonable based on the solicitor and junior counsel time spent. They defended the high hourly rates charged due to the complexity of the case. Shoesmith's side disputed the costs, arguing much could have been avoided with better communication engagement by both sides. They felt that the rates charged were unreasonably high. There was an extensive discussion around the worldwide freezing order and costs. Shoesmith felt it was unnecessary on the Copa side, that they should have engaged in more to resolve this. Shoesmith presented evidence of duplicate and unnecessary work inflating Copa's costs. They felt that time charged were unreasonable rates. They were charging some 600 pounds per hour for their costs, which is I have never heard of anything like that, at least not in the United States. That's so high. That would never fly out here. Judge Miller questioned why developers were sued in the first place, and at this point, Copa's side explained that the claim included airdrops and hard forks. And Judge Miller was actually reprimanding the Craig Wright side at this point, like, why'd you even sue these developers? And then the Craig Wright attorneys basically says that he goes, any party that loses is going to be, the bad, that they're going to say, why did you even bring this suit? Any party that loses, Your Honor. So, I mean, you're just saying that because you ruled against them. Judge Miller then said he would normally give a verdict today, but he's still writing another judgment, and he can't say when he'll exactly make the final decision on the case. So he didn't give an oral decision from the bench, but he did close the case and the file. So now, as soon as he gives that written judgment, the appeal timeline will start. And one of the things that they're asking for in the equitable relief is a referral to the criminal investigation division over there in the UK. And Mr. Pierce, who I had on before, he gave his analysis of what's happened before in criminal investigations cases on where there were charges of perjury. So he believes that this is the Arthur Van Pelt side, the Copa side, right? So I'm just kind of giving you both sides here. The Copa side, from Mr. Pierce, he told me that, in their opinion, that they're going to get a referral. They want a referral to the other side, to the criminal investigation side after this, as part of this relief. So that's part of the relief they want. And with that referral, then they believe that, according to the precedent that they have, which is a couple cases he cited before, there's where a politician had committed perjury on the stand one time, and then another politician had committed perjury 2 or 3 times on some traffic stops, and each of those people had gone to jail. That was some of the precedent that they're using, that they want to encourage criminal prosecution. Now there's no right to that. So it's really up to that criminal division if this is referred. So if Justice Miller gives the referral, then yeah, they're going to look into it. But then they would have to look into it and decide what they're going to do. So that's what the Copa side's really after. The Copa side is now after some huge, I think it's 30 million or so in pounds total, and then a worldwide freezing order for what Dr. Wright's allowed to say. And I think that may reflect some of the stuff as to why CoinGeek is taking down all the stuff about Dr. Wright. So, and Chain. So we'll see. But that's my little short introduction. Oh, feel free to bring on Jack Pitts too, Casey. He looks like he's on with us. And if you want to bring up Michael and Alex and Satoshi, feel free to jump up. So yeah, so let's open up to the hearing. Oh, Mehl, you're a listener now. Let me add you back. So who do we have? Crypto Spartacus, you're on stage, buddy. You've been following this case extensively. So, why don't you chime in and tell me your thoughts?
Oh, sorry. I was just playing with my mic there. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I sure can. The floor is yours, my man. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. My personal take on this is I'm still very open-ended. I'm kind of like I don't like to jump to conclusions. I like to kind of wait until I have the information needed to settle on a conclusion. And I don't know. I'm still just waiting to see how this all transpires. There's still a lot of questions that I have as to what's actually going on. There's a lot I still need to know to form a more concise conclusion, I think. I don't know. I'm always a kind of wait and see kind of person until I have more information. I really want to see what Dr. Craig Wright is going to say and like what his official response to this is going to be. Him just saying that he intends to appeal. I mean, I want to see on what grounds he intends to appeal. Really, at this point, I have a lot more questions than, I don't know, confidence in making a certain.
So what you followed the, you reported on the space quite a bit. So what is your evaluation as to the information that you do have?
Well, I mean, I presume that Craig is Satoshi. I think he may have lost some of his ability to prove that. And really, like, I'm uncertain as to what to think at this point. Like, I want to see what happens at this point. I don't want to make predictions here. I just really want to see what happens. Because really, the ball's in his court. He's got his appeal that he's either going to file or not. So I want to see what his next move is, really, at this point. I mean, he said that he's planning to appeal, but it's unclear exactly what avenue he's going to appeal on. I mean, no one from his team has publicly stated that yet, so Really, I mean, I haven't made an update video because I've been waiting for that. I've been waiting for his team to make a more lengthy statement. And really, just I've been watching all the updates happening, everything with Kristen Egger Hansen. It's
Yeah.
really interesting, but I want to see an official statement from Wright's team before I comment any further, because I want to see how they're handling this, like what their thought is about it.
So can I jump in on that and comment on the Egger Hansen stuff? So Egger Hansen, now here's the twist on this whole case that is going to be I really okay. There's two grounds for appeal. There's two legal grounds that are clear. One is the admissibility of the Madden report. Now, I've getting a lot of flack on that, and people saying, "Oh, that's not strong grounds." And the opposing side, now Mr. Pierce from the Copa side, who I met with, they believe that's totally irrelevant grounds. Craig, and on the reason being is because Dr. Wright's his experts did not rebut the evidence from the Madden report. In fact, they agreed with some of the evidence from the Madden report. Okay, that's their opposing view. So, and that was the court's view. So, I still am under the position that the Madden report alone, it was admitted improperly. Okay, so I believe that there's 3 or 4 cases that were actually part of the brief that this court's going to have to look at on whether or not that expert was independent and whether or not that expert was qualified. So that's one. The other one is really going to be a much more complicated argument, and that's going to be the Egger Hansen bad actor, because when they brought if you look at the judgment, there's a strong section about the bad actor part, where he goes into, hey, Craig Wright basically claimed there was a bad actor. Now he named a bunch of people that he thought might be the bad actor. He didn't have any proof. And so the court said, well, this whole bad actor, part about a bad actor being involved and getting all these documents out, this is just another wild tale, another wild lie by Dr. Wright. This is what the court said. And so that was only 3 or 4 days after the bad actor judgment came out. So apparently, Justice Mehl, he didn't see that bad actor judgment. Now, what is the effect on this case is yet to be determined. But we do know that there was a judgment against Egger Hansen, and that judgment was Egger Hansen. He's in contempt of court for failing to submit the iPhone, the laptop, and the computer that he from nChain files, property of nChain that he was supposed to surrender. He never did.
So I thought it's interesting. He's trying to make the defense for himself that he was acting as a whistleblower now. I thought that was pretty interesting. If you were acting as a whistleblower, why not hand those things over then, right?
Well, his defense is over, so he doesn't have a defense anymore. That's over.
I mean, just publicly on Twitter, that's how he's defending himself.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe socially that's his comments, but the court's already given him due process. They gave him an opportunity to raise a defense. He failed to. And they gave him multiple chances. He failed to.
Yeah, he's on Twitter, though. He's trying to say that what he was doing wasn't corporate espionage, it was whistleblowing.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that he's, obviously he's welcome to say on Twitter, but the court won't even entertain that, only because it's already decided. So, and that's the thing about a judgment is that, that means that person's had due process. They had the chance to argue a defense and why it wasn't this or that. He failed to do so. Now he's been found in default. So who's that? I added. Okay. Satoshi, you're up, buddy. Good morning.
Yeah. Hey, how's it going?
I'm doing good, man. We just did a recap on kind of what happened in the case. I know you've been following it super closely, so feel free to chime in. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I've kind of been on this a deep dive rabbit hole for the last 4 or 5 years, ever since this COVID malarkey. And it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't know how awake many people are, but on the 15th of August, 1971, when Richard Nixon removed the US dollar from the gold standard, that immediately turned all US dollar into securities fraud, and all currencies backed by it from the Bretton Woods Agreement was also securities fraud, because now you've got tokens or certificates being issued without any value backing them. So in order to protect this fraud, they needed to corrupt the legal system. And this is what, in the same year, they drafted a document in the UK called Memorandum FCO 30/1048 that highlighted how sovereignty would be surrendered, the monarch deposed, and high treason committed if Britain never joined the European Economic Community on the 1st of January 1973, which they did. So the moment they joined that, the entire legal system became illegitimate, and they now just simply use the legal system to protect their securities fraud, which they're perpetrating on the global economy. And they do that by using people's straw man in the court. And that's just what was going on here. So whenever somebody's called, and what they need is for Craig to confirm that he is his straw man, which is Dr. Wright, Doctor being a military maritime title, and Wright being his cognomen, which is his surname, which is a surety name. So once Craig got up on stage, and said, "Oh yes, I am Dr. Wright," the judge was just like, "Right, well, so once you confirm that you are your Roman cognomen, then unless you rebut the 12 presumptions of court, then it stands that you're a lunatic, that you cannot represent yourself, and that you're incompetent, and therefore the court won't listen to you, and the court can decide on whatever it wants, because it's an elaborate administration process, because there's no jury there." So the court obviously doesn't want Craig, or the banks don't want Craig to be recognized as being Satoshi Nakamoto, because he has created a genuine money for the first time, since 15th of August 1971, through the commoditization of data. So the judge was never going to listen to Craig. He was never going to win. So all this discussion about, I want to see his appeal and what's going to happen. All the lawyers, they're all in on this, because they're all part of the Bar Association, and the Bar Association has a monopoly on the legal system. So it's an elaborate charade. So unless so if Craig is not aware of this, he is never going to win. They're going to put him in prison, and they'll basically do whatever they want to him. And his lawyers who work for the Bar Association, they will also not rebut the 12 presumptions of court, or tell the judge that Craig is actually a living man, because they get paid by the Bar Association. So this whole thing is a complete and utter waste of time. And unless Craig has got an alternative strategy at play, I'm extremely concerned for him, because this whole thing is a joke.
Well, it sounds like a very good, you've got a lot of education on this process, and you supported it in a very foundational way. So it's very helpful. I want to hear any kind of open up here as well too, Satoshi. So if we could, we got Jack and Alex up as well. Mila, you're on stage too. So, but feel free. So did you have something to add, Satoshi? Something else before we?
Well, I mean, if people want to sort of speculate as to
what's going to happen. Yeah.
Well, what's going to happen is just, it doesn't matter what evidence Craig puts forward, because the court can just simply ignore it, because there's no jury there. So it's just, like I said, it's just an administration process. But the thing is, Craig and his lawyers also didn't put forward any definitive evidence. Like, for example, the emails that I've got between him and Dave Kleiman, where he mentions the word Bitcoin, for the first time. This was back in March 2008.
What about that Facebook post that you sent to me about him posting about Bitcoin right when it launched on Facebook?
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that post was on that post, as if anybody's listened to my show, where is significant, because it's the very first ever social media post mentioning Bitcoin.
How come that didn't get brought up?
Well, exactly. Either Craig didn't submit it, or his lawyers didn't present it. So either way, I'm hoping there's a strategy, but if Craig doesn't know about this straw man, then he could see himself in prison. So yeah, that's that. If I could prove that he is Satoshi Nakamoto, because that recent email that Crypto Tweaks brought forward, where Craig was talking about Bitcoin on the mentioned Bitcoin or calling his project Bitcoin or Bitcash on the 12th of March 2008. There was no one in the world. There was no one in the world, because Bitcoin didn't even exist.
It wasn't launched until January 2009. Well, the white paper came out, right? But it was a
There was, so he created the Bitcoin white paper on the 24th of January 2008, and then spoke to Dave about it, who obviously helped him edit it, and then he posted it to the Sands Institute on the 22nd of August 2008. So I mean, really, if you're posting something to the Sands Institute, which is a peer-reviewed white paper regarding Bitcoin on the 22nd of August 2008, and then the official release isn't until the 31st of October 2008, then he is Satoshi Nakamoto, and he's already won the Kleiman case, which saw him as the sole and rightful owner of the coins in the Tulip Trust, which people refer to as the Satoshi coins. And again, that wasn't brought up either.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Why the heck didn't they use the Kleiman case more on the Craig Wright side? And maybe we can open up for that if anybody wants to ask questions or comment about that. Jack, it looks like Crypto Scarters, you're unmuted. Alex, you're up. Jack.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to add a little bit to that. So usually, the opposing counsel, they have to offer an alternative. So if Craig says, "Oh, I'm Satoshi Nakamoto," they can't just simply say, "No, you're not." They have to say, "Well, if you're not Satoshi Nakamoto, then who is?" So they have to throw a lifeline out there that it could be someone else. Other than that, an affidavit by Craig saying, "I am Satoshi Nakamoto," stands. So maybe Craig hasn't offered an affidavit, but that if he did an edit, then that would have to be rebutted, and somebody would have to put forward an alternative candidate.
Yeah, it seems like he did, or I don't know, whatever he brought forward wasn't sufficient. So now we had this hearing today on the injunctive relief, on basically the retribution, I guess, is what's gonna affect him. We went through some of that, the worldwide freezing order, the costs, this potential referral to the criminal court, that's basically what was heard today. And ultimately that's the last hearing. That's it. So now he gets to decide if he wants to appeal. Alex, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering what the difference is between an affidavit and saying it on the stand.
Well,
why would one be considered a legal document and the other not, a legal statement? That's
the rules of evidence. So basically, an affidavit is nothing more than a piece of paper, words on paper. It's not evidence, unless, it's not evidence, if it's objected to. So if somebody objects to the admissibility of it, then it's not necessarily admittable as evidence and truth and fact, unless the person comes in and swears to it. A good example is that if someone writes an affidavit and then passes away, okay, that may be brought in as a dead man's affidavit. It could be brought in. That guy died. Here's his death certificate. That could be considered as evidence. But if a guy just writes something on paper, he doesn't come into court to swear to it, it's not necessarily admissible. It can be admissible. It really depends on the objection from the other side. Because if somebody raises objections to the affidavit, foundation, hearsay, speculate, calls for whatever the objection is, then it may not come in. So
an affidavit actually has to be rebutted, all of it, because it's a signed statement of fact. So unless those facts are actually rebutted, then the statement stands.
If they're admitted, they could potentially stand. The rebuttal in this particular case, the way they did it with the procedures, was they brought in Madden, and they said, Well, Madden's going to rebut everything that Dr. Wright said in his statements. And he's,
He wasn't, mate. Literally Patrick Madden's report was an opinion.
yeah.
That's it. That's it. It's literally an opinion. And the Copa lawyers, when they were saying, oh, Craig was telling whopping lies, or Craig is a liar. Well, Craig's lawyers should have objected immediately to that, because they have got no basis in law to call him such. Because as they admitted, there were no allegations of forgery or fraud. So they had no right to call him that. And as they admitted, everything that they said in court were questions. You forged this, didn't you? You forged that. Craig just said no. That's it. So it's kind of it's outrageous. What they've done is just simply what they call a wrap-up smear on him. So the Copa lawyers were saying, oh, you forged this, you forged that, you forged this, you saw, literally all effing day. And Craig's lawyers didn't object to that, because if you're going to call somebody a liar and a fraud, then you need evidence to back up your claim that there's a liar and a fraud. There has to be evidence of forge and forgery. Patrick Madden's opinion doesn't cut it, because it's just an opinion. That's it. So there was nothing.
Alex?
Yep.
Oh, I'm just seeing your hand up. What are your...
No, I don't have my hand up at the moment.
You don't? Okay.
Yeah, I do get that the whole thing is basically just people's opinion, the judge included, and that's kind of why I think the appeals court is much more important. It's one thing to have a single judge's opinion, but then that has to go through the legal rigor and due process of an appeals process to really stand the test of time. I think Craig has a very good case on his hands for appeals, regardless of what the BTC lot say. They're always going to say that he's not going to appeal and stuff. But that appeal's coming, and I think it's going to go well.
Well, I mean, what are people's thoughts regarding this bad actor judgment? Because it's not an allegation now. It's not something that he's just saying, well, there was a bad actor. Well, there's a case now that there's a judgment that said there was a bad actor. What are people's thoughts on that, and how it may apply or may not apply? Because I asked that to Mr. Pierce, from the Copa side, and he didn't really respond to that. So I really would like to hear the opposition of why that doesn't apply. Maybe Jack or open up, buddy. How you doing?
Great. Yeah. So I think on the Krishnagar Hansen stuff, first of all, it's a extremely good topic for appeal, or something that Craig can present to allow him to appeal, mainly because Krishnagar Hansen, in contrast to Craig, did not show up for his case, didn't return the evidence, which, he could have copied and done any numerous things to give back his iPhone and his iPad to nChain that was, rightfully nChain's, what you're supposed to do when you leave a company anyway. And he didn't. So that first case is actually kind of a minor case, but it really tipped Krishnagar Hansen's hand, because if you think about it, one of the things that the court, or all the courts that Craig has been into, has criticized Craig for is submitting evidence that are forgeries and manipulated. But that's exactly what you're supposed to do. I've been involved in a court case myself, a very important one to me, which ended up successful, thankfully. And one of the major things was you don't get to pick which evidence you hand in. If there's stuff that makes you look bad, you have to submit it. And now, I don't mean personal stuff, like you can redact that, but the court, somebody has to rule on that as well, because it could be relevant evidence. So someone has to see it. But my point is that everything Craig did is correct, but he gets constantly criticized for it because he relies on it, and I think that's been misinterpreted so many times. when Craig submits a forged document, it's no different than you submitting your real social security card or your real driver's license. And sure, somebody who maybe wanted to frame you and make you look like you were doctoring your own identification may take a magic marker and put stuff on your ID while you're sleeping. But that doesn't mean you don't submit it as evidence. In fact, Wright has stated in previous cases and possibly this one that and he has papers that date back to before Bitcoin was invented on digital evidence that says you submit everything. You purposefully submit things that you think are doctored and forgeries because you never know, those types of things can come out and the other side can make a mistake and it could be on them. In this case is a perfect example. I mean, Gregory Maxwell and Peter Vuhl, or however you say his name, these guys and some people who didn't show up, namely Greg Maxwell didn't testify. Thamos, Michael Markart didn't testify, and that's pretty telling right there. But these guys have evidence that that could go against them in court. And in fact, this sort of happened during the Kleiman case when the Kleiman side relied on a document that Craig proved was the forgery. So this is kind of part of how Craig's strategy is kind of being used against him. But now contrast this with Christian Auger Hansen's method, which was to not show up in court. He didn't not get served. The judge went out of his way to say, Christian Auger Hansen understood that he was supposed to show up to this court case. He fully understands that he's supposed to return this evidence that he stole from nChain after he was terminated, and he has not responded. And I think this is the first shot across the bow from nChain versus Christian Auger Hansen, who obviously did plenty of damage. And all the evidence points pretty plainly, and it's really easy to understand it, that he really was working against the case. I mean, everybody who was in that room in the mock trial understood that you're not allowed to have a mock trial. So why would you have one? That's insanity. And yet he promoted it, and he got all of his henchmen involved and put witnesses in there to make sure that looked really bad for Craig. Craig's the kind of guy that, sure, we could consider him an expert on legal things, but he's not an expert on all legal things, just like nobody is. So, to have him show up at this mock trial and just be wide-eyed and like, what the hell's going on? Why is everybody ripping into me? It's strange. And then lastly, and I saw this firsthand through things I won't talk about, but Christian Auger Hansen picked the forensic auditor for Craig. And that's a blatant cause for an appeal. You can't have a guy who's a known saboteur inside your company go in and start messing with evidence. I mean, it's pretty obvious in this trial from the evidence presented that Christian Auger Hansen had access to Craig's personal, not his personal computer, his work laptop, and has shown pictures of his access of it in the Fairway brief that he released like hours after being terminated, which was also super weird. This is a premeditated attack that is completely transparent. And, although I agree with almost everything that Satoshi said about the 1971 switch to fiat and all that stuff, I'm not as much thinking of it as a conspiracy of the courts, but I do think there are some conspiracies in there, and I don't know what Mellor's bent is, but I do believe that he was a bit starstruck from the Adam Backs and Willies, as I call them, and those kind of guys that were presenting, and the C++ guys. Like, I feel like I was a little bit starstruck and willing to trust these people. And they did a great, they spent a lot of money on this trial, and they did a great job of sounding very convincing. And there is some stuff in the evidence pile that makes Craig look suspect if you don't know Bitcoin. And I think that's the other big way that Craig can contest this case. In the pretrial hearing, everybody was all celebrating that he was allowed to enter his latex files and his BDO disk. But honestly, Meller knew that Copa had already looked at those things and were kind of like, they were fighting it, but they had already like dug dirt on it with their metadata and all that stuff. So it wasn't that big of a win to get that admitted. But the big win for Copa was Meller's pretrial ruling in December that said that nobody's allowed to talk about Bitcoin. Nobody's allowed to talk about the technology. And I don't know about everyone, but I think most of the people in this room that are still here and curious about this Bitcoin history, I think we're all here because we verified that Craig is Satoshi the way you're supposed to do it, which is his unbounded and incredible wisdom on Bitcoin itself, to the point where no one could have thought of all the things and explanations for everything that he came up with without being Satoshi. And that's how I've always said that Craig is Satoshi. I've always found the evidence pile curious. And in a way also supportive that even if they are forgeries, or if there was, if Craig erased a lot of stuff in 2011 because he was trying to, hide from being the next Ross Ulbricht and all that stuff, I think it's nearly impossible to forge all that amount of documentation. And I've seen some of the stuff that other people maybe haven't seen that is just impossible to forge. I mean, it would not only take you an incredible amount of time, but you'd have to have an incredibly deep knowledge of how Bitcoin really works to even forge it. And I think all that stuff was ignored. And so to me, I'm a little bit more of the bent that I wonder if there can be a fair trial the way the evidence is, and that there are some bad actors that have come in and changed documents. Another quick thing to mention that people constantly forget is that Satoshi Nakamoto, who nobody disputes is a great security expert of some sort, he was hacked in 2014, and everybody knows this, from Greg Maxwell to Craig's biggest hater. And Satoshi Nakamoto's access keys to certain things and forums that he was well known to be on were literally sold on the dark net in September of 2014. And what we don't know is how long the hackers had held that stuff. And it's my belief that whoever hacked De Morgan had access to that stuff dating all the way back to about March of 2014, when Ira started getting pissed off. So, Ira wasn't always against Craig, but suddenly in March, April, he started getting, information from certain people that made him convinced that Craig was some kind of bad guy. And I think all that evidence is ignored. And I don't know how. It's one thing to hand wave and say, how could it be possible that this guy just has all this bad luck and everybody's sabotaging him? It's just not believable. But it is pretty believable, right? Greg's not the only human being in the world that's having a lot of dirt thrown at him and things made up about him. And it's even easier here because cryptocurrency is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So there's a lot of money, as evidenced by Copa's bill itself. It's in the millions, tens of millions of dollars for this case alone. There's plenty of money that is being used to go against this guy, and it's a testament to Craig. I think that he is willing to risk prison, and he is willing to be humiliated publicly for the last 9 years on social media. That he's conducting himself the way he's conducting himself, and that's pretty honestly. And to point to one last thing, this is a guy that won't even use the coins that are attributed as Satoshi without being identified as Satoshi first. And I think that is a bit of a burden on his defense. But it's a good lesson in identity, and I think that's something that Craig has always been about, and it's not something a criminal does. A criminal would have. I mean, everybody's the judge is pointing out that Rob Jenkins should be, probably referred for perjury, but like, imagine if you were going to rig this trial with your witnesses, you would have far more stories and made up stuff than what these witnesses presented. I mean, these witnesses were relatively weak in terms of being able to prove that Craig was Satoshi. And I just don't think you go about rigging a trial by such weak witnesses. If you were paying people, they'd say a whole heck of a lot more about your Satoshiness than what his witnesses said. What his witnesses said kind of matched the way Craig was. He's very secretive. He didn't tell anybody much of anything. He still doesn't, no matter how close you get to him, unless you're his direct family member. He's just not going to tell you stuff, and a lot of that's for strategic reasons. And so I just think it's a cavalcade of or a comedy of errors, as they call it, where almost everything that can go wrong has gone wrong, and literally everything he's done has been misinterpreted. And the funny thing is, I think it's misinterpreted because he's kind of doing things the right way in a world that does not appreciate that anymore. The world appreciates you make a ton of money and you prove that you're not a bad guy later, and usually we find out you're not a bad guy, that you are a bad guy. So it's like, CZ, Zuckerberg, these people, their proof of work is that they made a lot of money. Now, how they did it and how dirty they were to get to it, totally different stories. And we finally have a guy who's so honest that he won't even take the money that's rightfully his because he hasn't proved his identity. I mean, that's some high level morality that I think is not only overlooked, but the state of the world is so bad that people don't even believe anyone who might have morals anymore. Like, yeah, right. You would pass up billion. I mean, this is what Judge Reinhardt said in the climate trial. Like, yeah, right. You would put all these Bitcoins away in a trust and then lock the key until 2020. Nobody would do that. That's crazy. And the way and Craig's just like, well, it was only a couple $100,000 at the time. I'm not going to risk my reputation for a few $100,000 when I have a whole career and security where I can make plenty of money. But like,
but the other thing on that, John, is that they're forgetting the morality of Satoshi himself. Satoshi himself gave Bitcoin to the world for free, and there's many reasons why that had to be done that way. But from an outsider's perspective, you might look at that and go, "Well, that's insane." You would go out and try and sell it to someone and make some money from it, as opposed to just giving it away and open sourcing it. But Satoshi did that, and like you said, I think it matches the morality of Craig that we're kind of missing in most of the world today.
And what you mentioned, well, some of the discussion here was Jack mentioned about the Ager Hansen, that potentially Ager Hansen was hired by, I'm sorry, no, Ager Hansen potentially had hired the experts. And I'm trying to remember back. Does anyone remember that? No, Jack, you mentioned it. Was that in the case where Craig mentioned that in the case that Ager Hansen hired those experts that rebutted the Madden report?
So Craig's lawyers were on the air up until, I believe, spring of last year, and Ante was fired, and they brought on Travers, whatever the hell their name was, and Travers was brought on by Kristen, right? So here's a guy, a mole sitting inside N-Chain. He's like, no, let's get rid of these Ante guys. Let me put some guys in. You just trust me. Here's some guys you're gonna love. And that Ali guy he brings in as like an expert inside of kind of N-Chain as a consultant. Like, here's a guy that was on King's Counsel for a while. You're gonna love this dude. And now we find out later that this Ali guy has been involved in all sorts of sordid things. And he uses his title as a weapon, but he's really just underneath a schlep and a bad human and working for bad people. And I think then Krishnagar Hansen I think one of the reasons he wasn't just fired outright in March, because I think what he was tasked with was helping sort of the early Encrypt and Nchain shareholders unload their shares for billion-dollar valuations. So this is how he got into Nchain. He sold them all on, hey, I've got a huge Rolodex of Arabian, billionaires and all these other people that will buy shares of Nchain at the billion to 10 billion to $20 billion valuation. And that's what he was promising, and that's why he was hired. And all the bad stuff that he did while he was CEO really wasn't supposed to be part of the system. But it was like, well, if you're going to give the guy the reins, because he can promise a 10 to $20 billion valuation, you got to give it to him. And I think by March of last year, it became apparent that he couldn't deliver, that he hadn't delivered any investors, much less attain the billion-dollar valuation. So why wasn't he forced out then? Well, I think he, thanks to his, what was the previous thing that he did for against Avalanche and for Internet Computer, I don't know what to call that, but he
During the dot-com?
Yeah, so I call it the Viking hello, because he basically brought Kyle Roach's head on a platter.
Oh, Kyle Roach, yeah.
Yeah, and Eamon Gunsyre, and made them look like the dirty pieces of scum that they are.
Oh, he infiltrated the Kyle Roach stuff, didn't he?
Correct. Yeah, and he, he tells the story like, well, I didn't take the video, like as if he didn't know the person that took the video, but most likely the person who took the video was either Ali himself, Ali Zafar, or some henchman that's, a normal guy that Christian hires all the time. So, that kind of action made him seem friendly to BSV, and I think, when he was not able to deliver investors last year, I think his way to kind of stay on as CEO was, hey, I can really help Craig win this case. And I love BSV, and you know how he was, like just filled with kind of too much fluffy bullshit that he was so excited about the technology and all that baloney. So I think that's why he stayed on. And then he really went out of his way to take control of the case, and that's why there was the mock trial in the summer, and that's why he did all the hiring and firing for Craig's legal case. And unfortunately, he was trusted, and that was a major mistake. But I think a reasonable court, or perhaps the appellant judges, would say, hey, this is a little weird. You don't normally have a court case where some guy who is now refusing to give his evidence in these other cases that he's being tried with, and has known dirt on him that's pretty easy to explain. It's kind of weird that this guy did the hiring. And I have my own questions here that are unanswered, but I don't know why another expert couldn't have been brought in at the last minute. I know the time schedule was extremely tight, and there was a ton of evidence, so that might not be realistic. I've heard people accuse Mehl of saying that he wasn't going to allow additional testimony from experts that Craig would have approved of. And I think Craig kind of left it to his lawyers, and maybe they didn't do a good job. I don't know, but I have a lot of questions there that are unanswered. But I'll say that in general, it's very strange to have a court case where some guy who's super Copa friendly. I mean, if you go back and look at Christian Hansen's comments within days of him getting ejected out of Nchain, you would think he was Copa. Like, it was like his sole mission was to destroy Craig's chances in this case. And I think that was just the sheep's clothing coming off the wolf. I think that was his purpose the entire time. He'll tell you to his face when I met him that I asked him a weird question. Maybe people didn't ask him before. And I said, well, I can't figure out what your expertise is, because everything I've read about you doesn't match anything that I've ever seen in business. Like, you don't really have any actual successes. Most of your business history has been with companies going bankrupt that you've taken over, and it doesn't make any financial sense. And I'm not really sure why that people claim that you're a billionaire. So I said, what is your expertise? Like, what is it that you do well? What is your value add? And his answer was, I do strange things for billionaires. And I think one of the appealing things that people like about Christian Hansen is that in many ways he's very honest. To the way we're almost self-deprecation, and that makes people kind of believe you. It's kind of a liar's trick, so to speak. And I think when he said that, I was like, well, that's just strange. So you're kind of like an anything for money guy. And then I think what we learned through his year-long reign and his continued reign is that we've also learned from his past history that he will get multiple payoffs for doing the same thing. So in other words, if I say, hey, I don't like Craig Wright and him claiming to be Satoshi, there's more than one party that will pay for that. Like, oh, and I can help destroy him. So, one thing he's very good at is kind of road showing and going around and picking up investors in what he's going to do, and then sometimes going back on it. And again, this is well documented in his history. And he's kind of like that guy in the movie that, it's like, well, I see you're working for side A. Can we pay you more money to work for side B? And sometimes he'll work for both. And again, I think he's probably got a lot of money stored away that we don't know how much it is, but it's probably significant. And it's in offshore banks and all kinds of hiding places. And I just think this is how he operates. And he does weird things for billionaires. And one of the billionaires is the internet computer guy. Another one is quite possibly Copa. We don't know. I think something that came out during the case was that Krishnagar Hansen had access to Wi-Fi that is bird and bird. I'm not sure how good that evidence was, but it was presented in the court case and kind of ignored. And I think there's a lot to uncover there. And again, I think there's many grounds for appeal. I'd say the best one is what Satoshi already mentioned, that in a copyright case, it's very, very odd for the claimant or the plaintiff to not have their own claim on the copyright. And this is one of those weird cases. The only one that I can think of, and someone very smart told me this, was the Champagne cases, where I guess the vintners in the Champagne region of France argued that other people shouldn't, like California, shouldn't be able to call their sparkling white wine champagne. And these are very old cases, but it's weird because, Champagne region and winemaking there goes back, probably 1,000 years. So there is no claimant. Whereas in this case, Satoshi's most likely alive, whoever he is, and he very much could appear and make his claim, but hasn't. And Copa has kind of weirdly made it for him, but isn't actually able to take copyright themselves. And that's another super weird part about this case that should be very interesting to the legal industry because it's so rare. And I think those kind of two things are probably the biggest ways to appeal this case legally. And then there's a bunch of stuff in Mellor's report, which I realize is really hard to read because it's like 250 pages or something, or almost 300. And there's just a lot of contradictions in there. There's a lot of kind of nonsensical, logical assumptions. And you combine all that together, I would say, I wouldn't be surprised if Craig's appeal is denied. There could be conspiracies out there at the government level, who knows? But I would say that he does have a rather good chance for appeal. Now, whether he can win it or not, I don't know. As Gavin correctly pointed out, you don't really retry the case. You can say the judge made the wrong or made an improper judgment on parts of it, but you don't really get to relitigate all the evidence and all that sort of thing. So it's complicated.
Yeah, it's going to be a super high. It's, in order to reverse a case, you have to be 1,000% right, because they don't just reverse them on a whim. It's going to have to be shown a true interference. If it is reversed, again, if it is reversed, it's going to have to show a true interference and a judicial error or was created. It would have to be a serious error in law. And I think Copa's side is going to say that there's no chance for that. That was the comments by Mr. Pierce, and that there's just no chance for that. And his comments with his discussions with Judge Miller about Bitcoin and whatnot. So they're that's their position, and I think that Craig Wright's position will be the doctor or the attorneys forum's position is going to be, well, the Madden report shouldn't have gotten in, and then because it got in improperly from Edgar Hansen, who now has a judgment against him, and he failed to turn over evidence, and he's their position is that all the bad actor allegations in the judgment that were overruled by Meller, saying that there's no proof of any bad actor. Well, I think that's an error. For one, that judgment came out against Edgar Hansen before Meller's decision. So, technically he published the decision was on the 20th or so, or 23rd. And it was only a few days before that the other judgment came out against Edgar Hansen. Now, the only problem with that is, well, it's an end chain judgment. Now, remember on the stand that Mr. Matthews, he says, well, I have nothing to do with this case. I really have no interest in this case. I'm not he vehemently objected to a lot of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see how they're going to make the connection to nChain's potential connection here to this case, because that could be somewhat problematic for nChain, because it seems like they're attempting to completely remove themselves from this, and maybe rightfully so. It could be damage control. They don't want to. They're following the law. The law says that, well, if he's not Satoshi, you want to not Satoshi associate with him. So it seems like it's a really historic time. I mean, feel free to open up. Anybody has any comments or questions here that they want to add, or feel free to. It's Jeff.
Yeah, I think one thing that should be pointed out that maybe people don't see is if you read the Fairway Brief by Krishnagar Hansen.
Which one's that? I forget which one that is. Fairway.
After he was released from nChain, he went on an absolute marketing tear where he started pre-releasing all the stuff that he had been gathering against nChain while he was still there. So for one thing, I don't think it's proper to be a whistleblower and remain inside the company. I think once you say that you're disgusted with what's going on, you're kind of supposed to leave, and then sure, you can whistleblow later with all you want, but you don't really get to just hang out in there and act as like a private detective or a mole inside the company. So that's like the first wrong thing that he did. But also, when he released the Fairway Brief, one of the most obvious things was how pointed his attack was with respect to the way the board worked at all the divisions inside nChain. And so if you read that report, if it's even allowed to be read anymore, I think they probably all took it off the internet, but in there was kind of a diagram of all of nChain's subdivisions and who the board of directors was on each kind of separate but related company. And some of the boards was 2 people, some of the board was 3, some was 4, and that's about the extent of it. But if you can gain, people don't understand a lot about business governance, but if you can gain 2 of 3 boardship, you run the company whether you own the shares or not. So you can be a minority shareholder, but if you hold 2 of 3 board seats, you can hire and fire everyone in the company. You can change the decisions of the CEO. You can do whatever you want. You effectively own the company, and you don't own it, but you run it. And I think one of the conditions of Krishnagar Hansen's employment was he demanded board seats. So on a lot of these boards, now thankfully none of the 2-person boards was he given a board seat other than the stuff that he brought to the table. So I think nChain swallowed Custos Group, or at least some of Custos's divisions, and those divisions were always 50% Kristen and 50% someone else who's probably nChain. And 50% is very important because 50% represents veto power. So let's say Gavin and I run company XYZ, and Gavin's like, well, I want to pay all the employees $1 million a year, regardless of who they are. And I'm like, well, that would be really a dumb idea. And he says, well, I want to do it. I could just veto him, right? I have 50% voting power, so there's no consensus. It's one versus one, and I couldn't. He couldn't implement that if I said no. It would require a unanimous decision on things like that. So the plan, in my opinion, is many of the most vital things in nChain related to the patent portfolio, which is the most valuable thing in nChain, were 3 board seats, and Christian was one of them. So all Christian has to do is one of 2 things to gain control of the patents, which I think was part of his goal. And I think it's part of Copa's goal. And I think we'll see that going forward. It'll become more obvious. But one of the things I think Christian did was he attempted to sabotage Stefan. And if you can sabotage Stefan as an improper board member and in a court of law get him released and say that he should have never been a board member, well, then these divisions that maybe have the patents inside become 2-person board seats, right? So Stefan is destroyed, labeled a criminal and untrustworthy, and so a court could, if Christian were to say sue nChain, he could say, well, Stefan is not a real board member, and so we have a lot of decisions over these patents that I think should just be open sourced, and he would have one of 2 at this point. So now you have a real problem if someone says, well, let's sue Vitalik and Ethereum over this patent. And Christian says, well, I'm a board member, one of 2. I say, no, we're not doing that. Well, that's the end of the argument, right? You're not suing Vitalik at that point. So I think Christian has not only tried to destroy Craig's court case, which is all about the Bitcoin brand name. It's all about the copyright. It's about of having to pay nChain, or not even nChain. They would have to abide by what Satoshi says, and if Satoshi says, well, you're not allowed to do this, and the conditions of licensing the Bitcoin name to you, as he sort of pointed out in his pre-trial offer at reconciliation, was, you have to acknowledge certain things if you want access to these things. And that's, I think, Copa's number one reason for its existence, is to get rid of that Satoshi ownership of the copyright. And second is, can we hijack all the nChain patents and make sure that they're not used against us? And if you put all the evidence together, that's what Copa does. That's Copa's real mission. And I think that's Christian Auger Hansen's mission. And those missions are so aligned that I would not be surprised if something like that, Wi-Fi access to Bird and Bird didn't indicate that maybe one of the billionaires that was hiring Christian Auger Hansen, in addition to others, was Copa members.
And what are your thoughts on? Well, what are your thoughts on the Mr. Pierce's comments as a patent attorney to the patent cases against nChain, which he's representing right now, which are administrative? I don't think they're actual civil cases yet, but there's some sort of administrative patent board that it goes to, that they've already stipulated to getting rid of one, and then there's 2 other ones that apparently. I mean, he said they were crowd funded, so it's just people in the crowd that are paying that, so it has nothing to do with Copa. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that, how they apply, or
Yeah.
for the.
I'm really glad you did that interview with him, because I think it pointed out 3 major inconsistencies that are super obvious. One, he claims that he knows somebody that are one of the people that are on some of the patents, or at least contributed to the patent materials at nChain, a researcher. And he claims that this researcher has told him that Craig doesn't know anything. He's a complete idiot and we did it all. And, all that kind of thing. And I think there's plenty of evidence against that. But he's like, but I'm not going to name names. And, I don't want to, but okay. But then you don't really get to claim anything, right? So you could just completely make it up. There's no reason he couldn't make it up. I mean, how are we supposed to verify that he knows this person that is unnamed and there's no validity to it or any evidence backing it or even any explanation as to what Craig didn't know? Just a completely made up story as far as we know. Now, it could be real, but he's not saying. And then the other thing he says was, well, Enchain slighted my good name and all this other stuff. Well, how and who did it? And I'm not explaining. Okay, well then, how are we supposed to believe that your good name shouldn't be slighted? Maybe they had a point. You don't seem to be arguing it at all. You're not taking it to court. You're not filing a libel case, and you're a lawyer. So we're just supposed to believe you on YouTube, social media, that this thing happened to you that was so wrong. And then the third thing is just the laughable. Well, I figured out that one of the 400 patents wasn't filed correctly. Okay, great, but that's one of 400, right? So, and I think he's contesting 3 others that Enchain is contesting. So it's like, my experience with patents is they're extremely flimsy in many ways, not just the secretarial aspect of it, but there's a lot of weird things with patents. It's not a very awesome system. It's a system that's meant to be dealt with in courts, right? Now he's like all proud of himself because he got one patent rescinded by Enchain because there was an obvious error inside the patent. Big deal. It's not even 0.3% of all the patents. So anybody that's willing to go to that level of detail, obviously might as well be a member of Copa. So I don't think he's objective whatsoever. He's doing weird things as somebody pointed out today, like I think it was Gavin, no, Gavin didn't point out, but somebody pointed out, like, how weird is it that this guy claims to have talked to Mehl prior to the trial, and his excuse was, well, I didn't talk about Craig, we talked about Bitcoin. And then after the trial, he has lunch with Mehl, and he completely contradicts himself and says, well, I talked to him after the trial, and he didn't know how a 12-word mnemonic worked. And he said it in the most technical way possible. So maybe Mehl even did know, but he just didn't know it in engineer speak. And he's like, well, what that told me was that Mehl didn't know anything about Bitcoin except what was in the case. And he did that on purpose because he's such an honest guy and he didn't want to affect his judgment. So he purposely read nothing about, well, not really, because you're hanging out with him, telling him your opinion of Bitcoin, which is obviously very BTC favorable. If not completely biased, because we find out that your best friend is Artie Van Pelt, and the whole thing is it's grotesque. I mean, I think even that could be added in, right, to the appeal.
Who is Artie Van Pelt, by the way? For anyone who doesn't know, because he is representing him, and I'm wondering. I really don't know much about the guy.
Well, he's the same guy as the researcher in Enchain that's unnamed.
Same guy as the researcher in Enchain?
Yeah, the researcher in Enchain that has no name and no evidence and no story that Pierce says claims that Craig doesn't know anything about Bitcoin or any other research. Same guy. I'm joking, of course, but I'm just saying, like, there's many people we don't know the names of, and that's part of this whole thing. It's like, I'm on record calling Judge Mehl the future Judge Mudd. And, I don't know, maybe he gets pissed off and sues me from it. I don't think he should, because in a way, Pontius Pilate and Mudd are somewhat innocent characters as well. But, feeble, but sort of innocent, not deliberately evil. But, I don't know, but my name is on it, right? Like, at least I have the sand to put my name on it. If you don't put your name on something, who knows whether it's real or not? It's more likely to be made up.
You want to, I thought it was you and I had a laugh because when we did a show, I think the first time we met, or not the first time we met, the first show we did, we were talking offline. Like I think we did like 2 hours or something with that. Then I stopped recording, and then you and I were talking for like another hour or something, or half hour, and you're like, "Oh man, I forgot to make my point this whole time." And you're like, the whole thing about you like got off track, and then we put you back on record. Then you told the story about Dr. Mudd, and it's just a funny story for anyone who hasn't seen it. It's just a 9-minute video, but feel free to, if you want to just recap on it. It's just, yeah. How
Well,
did that work?
I went off on a like, I wanted to make the point of, that there's these people in history you just plain old forget, right? But the guy you don't like, we don't know who nailed Jesus to the cross, right? Just some unknown Roman soldier. But we know who sentenced him to death ultimately, right? He's Pontius Pilate. So, like, here's a guy who literally is quoted by every witness at the event that was like, you could tell he didn't care. Like, he was just like, why are you bringing this shit to me? Pharisees are like angry at this guy. I don't really care. He's not causing me any trouble. And he just wanted to avoid like a revolt, which had already happened in Israel section of Rome prior to that. So that's what he was worried about. And he's just like, I don't know why you're so excited about this guy. It was almost the same kind of thing. It was like, this guy is kind of like not very important. He has a very small following. Like, why would you super powerful guys with the giant temple be worried about this dude? And they're like, well, we want to kill him. And he was like, I guess so. His quote is, I wash my hands of this whole thing, dips his hands in the water and says, do with them what you want. And I feel like Mehl is sort of the same thing. He's like, it's not that he's like super, I don't know that he's like evil. I mean, he might be, but like, let's assume the best about him. Let's assume he's not evil. And he's just like, damn, there's a lot of evidence against Craig. It looks really bad. Copa did a great job. This guy looks like a complete fraud. And it's like, but if he gets it wrong, regardless of how good it looked for him at the time, if he gets it wrong, and we find out eventually, kind of like, we don't know. I think there's a pope that's somewhat famous that put Galileo behind bars, essentially, like home imprisonment, for stating something we all know is true, or at least I think we all know is true. And those people look like idiots now. And for 1,000 years, people remember their name. Your name is Mudd, Pontius Pilate. These are kind of fall guys in history whose names are never forgotten. And my point was just that I made a comment about Mehl, but then I forgot to kind of explain the whole thing.
Yeah, and it was the.
Can I make a point there just quickly?
Satoshi, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so I missed a bit of that just because I had a visit around, but there were two things I wanted to point in about what John said about what the other side having to put a candidate forward or rebut the affidavit. The affidavit is what it's pronounced. But we know that Satoshi is more than willing to come forward and say, I am not Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto. So the fact that Satoshi Nakamoto is actually willing to come forward and say who he isn't, why is he not coming forward and saying, I'm not Craig Wright? When Craig Wright has been banging on about the fact that he is Satoshi Nakamoto, literally almost like since day one, and also the fact that Craig was involved with Bitcoin right from the early days. We've got evidence of that, him going to conferences and Dale Dickens' Bitcoin doco describing what Bitcoin was. There was a point I was going to make to that. There were two. Oh yeah. There was two things I was going to think. One, he's willing to come forward and say that I'm not Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto, and the fact that Craig has been in this from the beginning, and yet Craig is like the only person, the only individual who's been in Bitcoin right from the very beginning, who met Gavin Andresen, with regards to Bitcoin and all that, and there is not a single email between Craig and Satoshi Nakamoto. Now, how and again and why is that? And then going back to Mehl has already made a previous ruling, and Crypto Spartacus brought this up in 2023, where he said Craig Wright expended substantial skill and judgment in creating the Bitcoin file format and like something else, writing something like writing some kind of, code as well. So by saying that Craig is not Satoshi Nakamoto, is going against his own judgment. And you, as a judge, you're not allowed to go against any previous rulings. Now, the High Court has already previously ruled that Craig Wright has got the copyright to the Bitcoin white paper because nobody came forward to defend his claim. Satoshi didn't come up and say, "Oh, by the way, I actually wrote that." So the High Court legitimately gave Craig the copyright to the Bitcoin white paper because nobody came forward to rebut his claim. So we got that, and he's won the IRA Kleiman case. And if you're saying, oh, whether or not Judge Mehl is a bad actor, well, the fact is Judge Mehl has never ever once allowed Craig to step out of maritime jurisdiction. Whenever Craig started referring to people by their first names, the judge would always step in and go, "You mean Mr. or Mr. Mrs. blah 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 blah." And in his report, he's purposely written Doctor, maritime military title, and Wright in uppercase capital letters. So he knows full well what he's doing, because whenever you write anything in uppercase, it is referring to a dead corporate entity. And we know that we have seen Craig Wright in the flesh in court. So the judge knows exactly what he was doing. And the fact is, the way the court views things is that ignorance is no excuse. So the fact that you don't know that all capitals is actually indicating that it is a dead corporate entity as defined by the Chicago Manual Styles, well, that's your problem. That's not the court's. So the judge knows full well what he's doing, and he's even gone against his own judgment. So that kind of like tells you all you need to know about Judge Mehl.
We love your perspective, man. It's freaking brilliant. Crypto Spartacus, did you want to chime in on that? He mentioned you.
Yeah, actually, this is something I'm very familiar with, just because I was actually interrogated by the RCMP in Canada when I applied for my firearms license in 2012. Because
RCMP, what's that?
It's like Canada's FBI. It's our federal police force.
Okay.
So when I applied for my firearms license, I was initially denied my application. They said that they wanted to investigate me further. And they tried to say that it was because of interactions I'd had with police, like run-ins I'd had with cops when I was younger. It was just like things like I got caught smoking weed with my buddies when I was younger, and I mouthed off to the cops, and they wanted to like question me about that. But essentially, they really only interrogated me because I was researching what was something that was kind of popular at the time in Canada, this free man movement, which was people who were trying to remove themselves from common law jurisdiction of our government. So, or pretty much saying that they only had to exist under the common law jurisdiction of our government. So as long as they didn't commit fraud or steal or hurt other people, that they pretty much had to be left alone. And this is largely like what Satoshi was talking about here. This using all uppercase, and the maritime admiralty courts that we have, it's all kind of coded in legalese that ordinary people don't realize what's being done to them. But I know as a fact that Craig actually does know this. I watched one of his MetaNet ICU videos where he was actually explicitly talking about the Magna Carta and how the Magna Carta was created to talk about, or it was created to create a new designation, a free man designation, so that people didn't have to exist as the subject of their monarch, that they could choose between being a subject of the monarch or a free man.
Now, was that the philosophy of law that was released during the hearing last Friday?
No, it was one of his older videos, but it's on the same YouTube channel. I'm not sure. I watched that video. I don't think he touches on this particular topic, but it's definitely a topic that he seems well versed in, because I watched an entire video of him talking about the Magna Carta. And really the whole reason the Magna Carta was created was so that we wouldn't have to be forced to be a subject of the monarch, that you had the ability to operate as a free man. And that's something that's pretty much been legislated out of our abilities over the last 100 years. In all of the jurisdictions where common law is practiced, British common laws in the UK, it's in Canada, it's in Australia. Like I pretty much found out in 2012 that the government was watching me, and that was a year before the Edward Snowden revelations. So when I told people in 2012 that the government told me that they were spying on my online activities and that they didn't like that I was looking into this free man movement, people literally didn't believe me and just thought I was lying. Because like, oh, that's crazy. It's a crazy conspiracy theory that the government watches what you do online. Like in 2012, people thought that.
Back to the comments that Satoshi made about you researching, I think it was a Craig Wright judgment or something in a prior case or from Judge Mehl. I think, isn't that what Satoshi said? He said that you read a Craig Wright, or you talked about a prior judgment from Judge
Yeah,
Mehl?
I mean, the prior case between Mehl and Craig that was overturned on appeal, I must have missed what he was saying about that. But I mean, my suspicion here is that Craig understands that the court system is somewhat corrupt. I think he understands that there is a grand conspiracy to control the money system. I don't think that anyone who really looks at the money system and how it works could form any other conclusion. And there's clearly a coordinated effort between the government and the bankers that they borrow from to keep us all paying interest on money they create from nothing. It's not really up for debate at this point. Like, if you really look into this, you can't form any other conclusion, I don't think. I think you pretty much have to see that we're all forced to work for bankers who create debt and issue it to our government from nothing. And the courts are definitely involved in maintaining that system. And I think Craig is definitely aware of that. So I sort of think that he has some sort of strategy. That's why I want to see what he does next before I make my own comments about it.
And so,
Yeah,
right,
that's a good point. And also the fact that the previous case on on appeal, or it wasn't a case of 2 out of 3 judges or even 1 out of the 3 judges. It was 3 out of 3 judges found that Judge Mehl had made an incorrect decision. You know, which in my opinion proves incompetence.
I see that. Okay, let me give background on that. That was the what happened was that was the copyright, the database rights claim in the Copa case. That was a separate claim that was to be following the declaratory relief action. So the identity issue, which was determined if he was Satoshi. Then after that was determined, there would be a database rights claim. And that's what was overturned. And it was a motion to dismiss procedure. So the Copa filed a motion to dismiss saying that he didn't state a cause of action. And then Judge Mehl agreed on that. That went into appeal for a year, came back, and now that's surviving, but not anymore because this case is over. So this case would have to get overturned to then bring that back to life. That was the background on that, Satoshi. I think that isn't that the case you were talking about, the database rights case?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I knew there was something. I just haven't got the notes in front of me. But even in that case, it was still Mehl who said himself, Craig expended substantial skill and judgment in creating the Bitcoin file format. So
the file format, is that the protocol? What is the file format?
The thing is, only Satoshi Nakamoto would have created the Bitcoin file format. Yeah, who else can create the Bitcoin file format other than the creator of the system itself?
So the file format is the technical stuff.
No, the file format is just the way a entry, a transaction is formulated. So like the first time you try and do anything with Bitcoin, you kind of have to at least either build a wallet or figure out how to send a transaction. And you have to figure out down to the last detail exactly how you have to formulate that transaction in the proper order so that the Bitcoin network recognizes it as a transaction. And so that's known as file format. So you're not allowed to just steal that, whether it's an Oracle database or whether it's Bitcoin. And the interesting thing about Mehl's judgment was that he allowed, I think, the Bitcoin copyright, which is sort of the brand name aspect of it, and maybe includes the white paper. And then the second part is the database, which is sort of like the transaction database, meaning up until 2017, when BTC splits, there's a history from '09 to 2017 of all the things that transpired, and that's sort of ownership of the database. So, for instance, Oracle will give you a copy of their database, but they're not going to give you what's inside Oracle's database, like within their company that has all their, revenues and billets and all the information inside the company, right? Like you get to buy a blank version of a spreadsheet. You don't get like the spreadsheet that has somebody else's data in it. And that's what Craig is saying BTC essentially did was they not only took our name, which is the part number one, but they took part number two, which is they didn't delete the spreadsheet before they made it. Litecoin deleted the spreadsheet, right? Litecoin was like, we're not going to take the Bitcoin name and we're not going to take the Bitcoin database. We're going to start from scratch. It's going to be exactly Bitcoin with two changes, shorter block times or whatever nonsense that lead guy came up with. It didn't matter. And so they're okay. But BTC split off, stole the name, stole the database. And the last thing is the file format. So when you look at it in reverse, like what kind of trouble could BTC get in? Well, the copyright's not that important because Bitcoin or BTC can just say, oh, you want a new name? Okay, we're Corecoin now. And they can get rid of a lot of liability that way and fix the situation. Same thing with the database. It's like, well, we can just clear the old transactions, most of which are not in the UTXO set anymore. So there's like a way they can fix that. But there's no real way to fix the file format without kind of disturbing everything. And so I think that was the most important piece. And this is what these judges do, right? They kind of like, they try and make it look like they're being fair by giving the easy points away. And then they nail you on the really important stuff that's irreversible. And in that respect, I agree with Satoshi that I think there's a little bit of devil in Mehl in this respect, and a lot of things that he's done and in the past, but also in this case that were not necessary and are certainly not objective. And in that respect, I think his name is worse than mud, but it's debatable.
Worse than mud. Wow, that's a big bold statement, Jack. I gotta love it. Well,
I can make a good case for Mehl just being kind of an innocent decider of things, and that from what he saw, the way I read his report is, it's pretty convincing. If you didn't know anything about Bitcoin or Craig or the Bitcoin history, and you were just coming into this fresh and like, let me just read Mellor's report on this guy. It's which again just sounds like Copa wrote it, but it's very convincing. Like if you're not able to argue the points yourself, you're like, oh damn, like how do you explain that one?
Hey, as a matter of fact,
I think when you read the report, one of the things Mehl mentions is that the number one thing that he sort of relied upon to kind of convince them that all the other things were fraudulent, which is kind of how he sort of claims that he did it. Like, okay, well, maybe you could go either way on point Z, but because point A clearly, I thought the evidence was clear that Craig produced a fraudulent intentional forgery on point A's, B, and C, and D, that I'm just at point Z, I'm just like, whatever, there's enough, Copa presented enough stuff to make me think that could be forged too. So I'm just going to agree with them. And
now let me present, I see Mr. Pierce is in the audience, so I just sent him a request to come up to the stage if he wants to, but his point was that, that Judge Mehl is not allowed to go out and research all of the stuff about Bitcoin and some of this background. And in fact, he didn't do that. And so that's his point. And therefore he wouldn't know all the background stuff that wasn't presented in the case. So
yeah, but part of researching Bitcoin is talking to people. That's the number one way to research Bitcoin. And in not this interview that you just did, but the previous one, I think he already basically said, well, we didn't talk about Craig Wright or the case a lot. It was like danced around, but we did talk about Bitcoin. So it's not true to say that Judge Mehl didn't do anything with Bitcoin. If he's having lunches and dinners, he should have did what Craig did in the dinner with Hearn and just declined to talk about it at all, any of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, Casey, if you see, oh yeah, he's up. Yeah. So, hey, David, you're welcome to respond. I'm glad that you came up on the stage. Thank you, my friend. And, we we definitely want to hear your position, because you know, your name came up and you have every right to, I hope I may have not said what you said correctly, but, you kind of heard, I don't know if you heard what, John Pitts was saying here, but you're welcome to comment or respond. How you doing, buddy?
Good. Thanks, Gavin. I've missed the first. I don't know how long I've been here, but first hour or so, I've not heard anything.
Oh, okay. So
I was just,
we were talking about, well, oh, you've heard nothing?
only the last 10 minutes or so.
Well, some of the recaps here was, well, John, did you want to just open back up and, yeah.
Sure. So what I said, David, was there was three things I found highly odd about your interview, which was one, you made a claim that Enchain soured your name, but didn't say anything about how or why or what or who or anything. So it's for a lawyer. I on the one hand, I can understand that, you know, maybe you don't want to litigate or any of that stuff, and so you just keep your mouth shut. But at the same time, as a lawyer, you should know that if you say something in public and don't substantiate it, well, then now you're just doing the same thing back to the person that you claim was making unsubstantiated claims about you. So that was one point. And the second point was just about the Mehl stuff, where at one point you claimed you didn't know anything about Bitcoin going into the trial, and that was to be commended, which I would agree with in a certain way. In another way, I think it was stupid, and I thought his pretrial ruling was incredibly dense, not allowing the two sides to present what they thought Satoshi meant or interpreted by Bitcoin, and then presenting, you know, BTC versus BSV, and of course, I think when you do all that, you'd say, well, this guy Craig seems to agree with Satoshi almost 100%, and BTC quite the opposite. So I thought that was a weird comment. And then thirdly, you shouldn't be. The last one was you claimed that you're talking to somebody who's a researcher at Enchain that's involved in the patent business, which is pretty much all of Enchain, and then claiming that this person said that Craig doesn't really know much and he's not very technical and all this other kind of, I would say, slander. And I wouldn't call it slander if you'd said, oh, well, here's the person and this is his name, and this is exactly what he said, and this is how I think he's right. But it was just kind of like, there's a guy and he's out there, and I don't know if you're making that up. I mean, and then lastly, you're a guy who's, you know, kind of trying as hard as you can to be objective in your interview, but at the same time, you're going tooth and comb through the patent portfolio, and the best you can come up with is 1 out of 400 problems. I realize there's like 3 or 4 others, but those are being contested. But it's like you found one kind of procedural thing that didn't quite work out, and maybe, who knows, maybe it looks suspect, but it's one. Like, you know, my experience with patents is it's a very delicate system. There's tons of errors, and there's tons of weird stuff going on, and there's lots of employees involved, and there's room for all kinds of bad stuff. And if you can only come up with one hit out of 400, I would almost say you wasted your time. And furthermore, why are you doing it? I wouldn't do that. Like, I owned tons of Apple shares for enormous investment fund, and I read tons of Apple patents and have been involved in patents going back before that from a business reason. Had every incentive to want to know how everybody viewed those patents. And even I didn't go through them tooth and comb. Research in Motion is another example, or I would have been tremendously paid if I was right on the patent stuff, and they ended up losing that. But like, I could have gone through all that, but it didn't even make sense for me, who had a massive incentive, a massive monetary incentive. So why are you doing it if you don't have a massive monetary incentive? I tend to not believe people are going to do a ton of work for no reason.
Well, David, you know, thank you again for jumping up, and that's kind of a overview as to what we were discussing. So hopefully, you know, floor's yours. I want to hear your comments and response. So please.
Well, I don't really have anything in response to that. It's mostly just nonsense. But the first point was, you know, the complaint that was filed against me. I'm not going to go into that. I just mentioned it to you, Gavin, because you mentioned the possibility of discussing with, what's the guy's name, Robert Allison, and that was my condition, because I'm pretty sure that Enchain are not acting in good faith. So I'm not going to go before and debate before their senior IP lawyer unless things are cleared and above board. On the other stuff, it just sounds like rambling to me. I mean, I know the people that I'm talking about who used to work at N-Chain. I've been in contact with 3 of them. I'm not going to name names, but you can probably guess who they are. The people that are not there anymore. I'm just acting like a journalist here. I'm not going to name my sources. If they want to pop up, in fact, one of them has popped up. Is trying to read the New York Times article recently. He's in there. The other stuff, I don't really get what the point is. I'm not going to try and justify myself. I don't need to justify myself. The question of why would I go to so much effort and only attack one patent? Well, I'm doing this for free. Managed to get funding to file oppositions on 3 of them for only a few hours work, really, outside my normal day job. Yeah, it's 1 out of however many it was. It's about 100 or so that have been granted by the EPO. Yeah, so what? I mean, I don't have the money to go filing oppositions for 100. If I did have the money, if someone was paying me for it, maybe I would. There are a lot more targets out there. I just went for the low-hanging fruit.
Well, I think you have to look through 400 fruits to get to the one.
Well, I don't know what you know about patent law, John, but the one that Arthur filed it. I just did the work behind the scenes. Was the clearest invalidity attack that could be done. We're not doing it on behalf of anyone else. It was just, okay, I saw it in 5 minutes, saw that this one was dead. We filed an opposition. It's now dead. It doesn't prove anything.
All I know is we have a guy that not only puts forth all the evidence into a court of law where it can be properly analyzed, but even puts the forgeries in there to make sure the other side gets to see those too. But on the BTC side, it's fake names, people we don't know. Nobody really knows if Arthur Van Pelt is his real name. Sounds like a real name, but who knows?
Oh, come off it. I mean, he's a real guy. Don't go there. That's just ridiculous.
It's not ridiculous at all, David. I'd be satisfied with you telling me if that's his real name or not. If it's his real name, then I'll shut up.
It's his real name.
Oh,
it's just a pointless argument.
Let's take that as true then, because he does represent him, Jack.
Okay. Well, I don't know of any other place he exists on the internet in any way, LinkedIn, nothing other than he writes.
Well, you should know very well from what went on with Hodlonaut over the last few years that once people have been doxxed and their address put out there, all sorts of bad things happen. And I would expect those bad things to happen to Arthur Van Pelt because he's been Craig Wright's nemesis for the last few years. So I'm not surprised that he doesn't want to reveal his location. I mean, everyone knows who he is. You can see pictures of him, but no, he doesn't want to be tracked by private security firms all the time.
Listen, you're the perfect guy to answer this then, since you're his lawyer or something, Artie Van Pelt. There's a direct correlation with his first anti-Craig piece and the Bitcoin wallet, PIP wallet that he produced, and having lots of money go into it in the tens of thousands of dollars initially at probably very low BTC prices. So what's your analysis on what Arthur Van Pelt's motivation is? Because obviously if he has to have a lawyer and is equally as secretive as Satoshi Nakamoto was in terms of no one knows anything else about the guy, what is his motivation besides just getting paid?
I don't think he's getting paid for doing what he's been doing, but I'm not privy to that. It's not my business. I'm not his lawyer. I'm acting as a patent attorney helping him out.
But it's on the blockchain.
I don't know anything about that. Sorry.
Well, then it's good that you're learning, because Arthur Van Pelt received in the tens of thousands of dollars from anonymous donors right before and during his first several weeks of attacking Craig Wright. So sounds like he's a paid shill to me.
So, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't say either way. But even if, let's say, for the sake of argument, even if someone is paying him That doesn't mean that what he's been saying is not true.
Yeah, but it's
And what-
awful weird for someone to devote the majority of their life to destroying another person for no reason other than you're just getting paid by someone directly.
Nobody's paying me for it.
Well,
I want to see Craig Wright go to prison.
how much BTC do you own?
I'm not going to tell you that. That'd be ridiculous.
Exactly.
And what are your David, what are your thoughts on the effects of this? Well, first of all, so they had the final, and is it correct that today was the final injunction hearing, and that's now there's no more hearings in the case?
Yeah, they just finished off with the costs, arguing over costs, and there's going to be a judgment coming out in the next few weeks, as far as I can tell.
What's left to rule on for Miller?
Well, there's the injunction. What form of injunction it's going to take against Craig Wright? So what he's allowed to do. I expect there's going to be an injunction to stop him suing anyone on the basis of him being Satoshi, because that's been decided that he's not. How far that goes, whether it infringes on his freedom of speech, etc., I don't know. That's what the arguments were going on about last week. I don't know when there'll be a referral.
There was a worldwide freezing order, and then the cost between the parties
done during the trial. I think the cost is pretty much settled. I mean, there's been lots of money going into court on an indemnity issue. I forget the terminology. But yeah, millions have gone into court on Craig's side, from Craig's side, and various actions have been dropped. It seems to be all happening anyway, even before the final judgments come out.
And so in the legal sense, when does the appeal timeline start if he has grounds for appeal?
Yeah, it's a bit confusing because I was looking for some mention of 21 days in the judgment that's been out, but it was said somewhere, I forget where it is, in the last few weeks, it's the handing down date of the final judgment with the resulting from this hearing, 21 days from that day. So it's not started yet. The time for appeal has not yet started.
Okay. And also in a legal sense, before you came on, John and I and others were discussing if any, and we were wondering, and I really wanted your opinion, if any at all effect of the other case against Ager Hansen, which went to judgment, if that has any effect on this appeal, potentially, or this Wright judgment.
I don't see why. Ager Hansen wasn't, well, some of the stuff that he disclosed came into the trial, didn't it? But he wasn't a witness. I mean, it's sort of peripheral, really. There's some interesting evidence that came out of Ager Hansen, but I don't see how the case, the dispute between N-Chain and Ager Hansen has any relevance to the decision on Craig Wright.
He was working against them, and he chose their expert, and he sabotaged their own defense.
Well, I think the claim, David, is the claim is that Wright, or this is Wright's claim, is that there was a bad actor, and so I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, that was the problem. The problem with that, there are two problems with that I can see. One is that the experts all agreed that at a minimum the various documents were inauthentic.
The expert chosen by someone.
Okay, yes,
Hold on.
But experts from both sides who swear to be impartial. And the second thing is, if there's some sort of conspiracy against Craig coming from Ager Hansen, there was no evidence provided whatsoever, and there was months before the trial that Craig could have submitted some evidence that Ager Hansen had been doing this or that, but it all just came out during the cross-examination. And it was all just completely unfounded allegations that came out. No evidence to support it at all.
So
Well,
if
there's-
anybody has a, raise your hand if you guys want to jump in. Jack, you're on the stage, so we can prevent interruptions because it makes it totally, oh yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Well, I mean, there's evidence that the guy conducted a mock trial, which he had enough legal persons on staff, including a King's Counsel guy, where he knew that was inappropriate and wrong and would get right in trouble, yet he did it anyway. And that's not disputed.
Well, that's a case for the Bar Council to decide. That's not really to do with the Copa Wright case. It's Bar Council rules or code of conduct.
It has everything to do with it, because if you're doing things to destroy a man's credibility, which is very much on trial, then you're exactly doing things inside the company as a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, I think, so David, I think what Jack's saying is there's a judgment now to say that Ager Hansen didn't provide this information back to the court. And just wondering, how, it's a complex connection. Is there a connection there? It's going to have to be, I don't know.
If it was any relevance, the dispute was already ongoing before the trial started. So if it was any relevance, it would have come up, and it would have found a way into the judgment somehow, and it didn't.
Well, he mentioned Judge Miller mentioned in the judgment that Wright claimed there was a bad actor, and he named a bunch of names, including a potentially Ager Hansen as a bad actor. Then Judge Miller said, he ruled on that. He said that was another lie by Dr. Wright. So I don't know. Does that make it appealable? I'm asking I'm being subjective here. I don't know. And yeah, it may not be, but I'm hoping that you got more expertise on this than I do. So
well, I'm not that sort of lawyer, so I can't really say, but that sounds to me like it was one of the findings of fact. So findings of fact and assessment of witnesses are all done at first instance.
Mhm.
And those are the sort of things that are very rarely re-examined on appeal. In fact, there's a couple of points in the judgment where Justice Mehl refers to a couple of cases that say exactly that. So he's clearly had that in mind. So I don't think they're relevant or even appealable points. And even if they were appealable points, I don't see how it changes anything in terms of Craig Wright's not Satoshi. It doesn't turn that over. Even if you appealed and won on, I don't know what you'd appeal on or how you'd win, but it wouldn't change the key findings.
Well, that's not true, because if you find that you have, let's say, there's been some modern cases where a guy's been in prison since he was 17 and he's 65, and they find the DNA evidence underneath the person that was murdered's fingernails points to an actual killer, and it all makes sense. Everything's reversible in that respect. So if you find out that there was someone within N-Chain producing some of the evidence that was found in trial that Mehl did comment on and used against them, in addition to the credibility issue, that it's very much at play.
Okay, that sounds like absolutely nonsense to me, but okay.
Well, I guess my nonsense is documented, so if you want to look it up, you can. But your evidence is not documented. I have things on the blockchain about Artie Van Pelt, but you're just saying, well, I don't know.
To stand any chance of that, having a snowball's chance in hell, you'd have to overturn all the findings on, the test 40 examples of documents being
Well, listen,
forged by Craig.
Let's focus on
why
something.
would he do that if he's Satoshi?
Let's focus on something you can answer. I thought you had said that you maybe attended the hearing from Friday, and I know nothing about it. I haven't even read a transcript or nothing more than some BTC people's opinions of it, but somebody in BTC basically said that they were trying to say Craig's on the run, he's in a different country, and all that might be true. I have no idea. But they were trying to say that Craig's side was admitting and saying, we'll never try anything again if you just let us go on the criminal stuff, and, you know, basically trying to get a deal.
I think the
And-
quote was that they quoted some of the transcript about how the Craig side was. Do you remember, David, what it said? It said something about potentially submitting. I think.
I don't know. I've not seen that. I don't know what you're on about.
Yeah, Jack. Yeah, I do remember there was something about that comments from a post, but I think it was misconstrued about them saying, well, Craig's not going to appeal, but it didn't say that. I think they just said, well, they're not disputing what's already been ruled on.
Well, no, the post that I saw, and I don't remember who wrote it, but I could probably find it. It basically said Craig won't appeal, and here's reasons why. And one of the reasons is that his team was basically going to admit that concede all other future cases to gain some kind of leverage on the relief. And then also the Copa side, or Huff KC, basically argued, well, we might consider that. However, there's some kind of loophole, and that was the key word in the thing that I read. That there was some kind of loophole that Craig and his lawyers could use to continue to try it by, you know, goading people into suing him or something, some other thing. I don't know if there's any truth to any of it because I didn't listen to the hearing. So I was just curious if you had listened to the hearing, if any of this makes sense to you, or if any of this is true. I know that the Craig won't appeal stuff is basically just sounding off.
That's not actually. No, it's not from the hearing that I've seen that. You know, I've seen documents that say that the fact that the other cases, so the pineapple hat case, has been dropped. That's a pretty big deal because that wasn't actually dependent on the Copa versus Wright case.
Oh, that's right.
But that's
Yeah,
been
he dropped cases. Yeah.
And the Hodl case has been dropped, both in the UK and in Norway. The cases against Kraken and Coinbase have been dropped. The Bitcoin file format case has been dropped. So that they've all just fallen away. So that tells me that they're not going to appeal on the key points. Otherwise, those would be on hold rather than just dropped. So they've actually been discontinued.
That's a valid point. That's a valid point you make, David. That it looks like it looks like there's a retreat going on.
It is a valid point. So what I would ask is, if he ends up submitting an appeal, what would you make of it? Why would he do that?
The only the thing left to appeal on, I think, is whatever the final judgment on the injunctions and all this other stuff, the consequential stuff. If, for example,
it's called relief,
goes further than Wright is comfortable with. I guess he's not comfortable with any of this.
Yeah. So if
But
we lost you for a moment, go ahead.
You can't. Sorry, if there's a point where it's arguable whether his human right to freedom of expression has been infringed, that could be appealed, and then the injunction could be toned down on appeal. But that's not going to change the fundamentals. It's not going to stop the criminal prosecution going ahead.
Wow, valid. I love it. Great discussion, David. This is fantastic, man. Thanks for sharing this. I mean, anybody have any questions or comments? You know, you guys want to join, raise your hand, or feel free to come up on stage and we can start kind of winding this down. So what, Casey, anything that you wanted to bring up here? Alex, anything that we should, any other people want to jump up on stage? I see some other friends. I'd like to go ahead.
I do have a question for David. Would you accept a proof of identity in the form of a cryptographic signature from an early block regardless of what the message is and regardless of who is producing it. Would you accept that as a proof of identity of Satoshi or Satoshiness?
I think it's a bit of a leading question. You'd have to get, if someone came up with a valid signature to, let's say, the Genesis block address, then everyone would start paying attention and go, "Oh, it looks like this guy actually is Satoshi." But that by itself, if it was a one thing, I mean, it doesn't prove your identity, because there are ways of getting, if those keys have been handed to someone else, then all you can say is someone's got access to that private key. But if Satoshi actually did want to reveal himself, then he would have all sorts of different evidence.
So just a follow-up question on that.
It would be a kind of, it wouldn't be just a one thing. It would be kind of, if you provide one valid signature, okay, that changes the game. And then you'd start looking and why would someone want to reveal themselves as Satoshi, and what else would they be able to do? They'd be able to do all sorts of things.
So just another follow-up question. What would that surrounding evidence be?
Sorry, my connection keeps coming and going. I keep missing bits.
No worries, mate. What would the surrounding evidence be that would have to accompany a signature from an early block?
Well, it doesn't need any surrounding evidence. That's the whole point of
But you just said
cryptographic
it did.
signature, and
Hold on.
that would be one bit of evidence. That would be, okay, someone's got the private key. That would prove, the proof that would provide would be someone has definitely got the private key because they've just signed, and the message would be relevant. If the message said, "My name is Craig Wright and I am Satoshi," and then it was using the private key that is associated with the block 0 address, then everyone would sit up and go, "Oh, hang on, maybe he's got something." But just the signature itself would provide definite proof, I would say, that someone's got that address, and the message would be relevant.
Okay, Alex.
Yeah, no, I was just kind of saying that you said that you needed to look at other things other than just the signature, because the keys can be transferred and all this stuff, and I was just kind of wondering to pin down on what that surrounding evidence that doesn't rely on a key and a signature might be that would indicate that someone is likely Satoshi, because this whole case is Craig Satoshi, isn't he? You have your opinion, we have our opinion. We don't think a cryptographic signature is really relevant, because a key can be transferred between people. So we're kind of looking at specifically the evidence that would surround Satoshi and suggest a Satoshi-ness, if you like. And we've looked at that and said that Craig fits that bill, and you would disagree, but I'm not actually sure what the other evidence you would need to see that would indicate that someone is Satoshi, whether it's Craig or someone else. Is it like papers from before Bitcoin that indicate that they were working on it? Is it early involvement shortly after Satoshi disappeared, or even during, or what kind of things are we supposed to be looking for?
Okay, David, you want to respond to that? Feel free to. If not, no worries. We can open up to any other comments or questions. Emmanuel, you joined the stage. Did you have any comments or questions to add, or anybody else want to raise their hand? Feel free to.
Yeah, hello, Gavin.
Hey, Emmanuel.
Everyone.
Hello.
Good to see you, or to hear you, and to speak with you and everyone else. Yeah, I want to open a topic for the next time, because now you're ready to wrap up, I think, the space, as you said, which was very long. And yeah, I heard a lot of repetitions. as well. But you know, repetita iuvant, say the Latin used to say that it's always good to repeat things. But I want to move forward. But I also want to repeat myself because I want to address the political side of Bitcoin in terms of community and the political side of money itself, because money is a political contract and and Bitcoin is money. If you want to, we use such as money. I mean, we need to address its policies daily and onward, because it's not a static thing. Aside the basic of the protocol, that it's immutable, whatever else. Yeah, I agree, and I still think that Craig is Satoshi, whatever else. Yeah, these are my hot topics that I really want to discuss with you and anyone else. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So it sounds like the political side of, or the political effect of Bitcoin sounds like in summary, which is that could be a really interesting space. We should.
Yeah, it sounds like a really good after space topic. If Mila, I don't know if your second account will let you speak, but now would be a good time to take that poll if anybody wants an after space.
Okay, yeah, I think the poll would be Mila. So basically, the poll. Are you, well, first of all, are you open to hosting an after space? And if so, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so I
Yes.
think what was the poll that you wanted to ask people to raise their hand if they were interested?
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. Give a thumbs up. Everybody who's
thumbs
interested,
up,
please
yeah.
give a thumbs up. Yeah.
Thumbs up if you want to do an after space with me, with Mila hosting it.
And Casey, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna go down to the river with my daughter actually, so I'm gonna bow out for the day. But this has been so interesting, and I learned so much more every time I listen to you guys. John, thank you so much for everything you brought to the table today with the conversation. Alex, I mean, this is very, very interesting stuff. We're definitely watching a movie here.
Hey, beware of that man down the river, especially if he's wearing a small coat.
Oh, geez. Thanks.
What was that Chris Farley skit on Saturday Night Live about the van down at the river?
Exactly. Hey, just because it's fresh in my mind and it is topical and controversial, I just reread the part in Mellor's written judgment about where he says about the unsigned integer. The keywords being Satoshi would have known such and such, and this is like all over the report. So just over and over and over again, Mellor kind of just says, "Well, I kind of believe Copa had enough evidence to make me believe their side of the story." And furthermore, Satoshi would have known or would have not known, or like a lot of assumptions about what Satoshi would do, which to me is directly appealable. I mean, there is no, if you don't believe Craig is Satoshi, then there is no other Satoshi presented. So there is no way of knowing anything about Satoshi other than the few things that you can read and interpret. So it's sort of like, our interpretations of history. Like there's a lot of stuff written down, but we don't know if it's satire that the author was writing or if it was based on reality or what. So everything's free to be interpreted. But something like that, I focus on it because I remember watching it in the trial, and Mellor does a pretty good job of describing it, of describing the mood and the pauses and everything that you would only get if you were watching it. And what Craig said initially in the first second was it's bigger, it's larger, and that to me is perfect Craig, because anybody who's a coder would, if you're given a test on C++, so what does unsigned integers do? Almost everybody would answer, oh, well, it's just numbers without the negatives. And that's kind of like a classic student answer where you don't really know why there's unsigned integers, but you just know that they exist, and the teacher's going to want to know, so you better say no negatives. But the whole point of an unsigned integer is it opens up one of the 256 registers, which allows your highest number to be bigger by double. So you end up with a bigger number. And that's exactly what he said first. And then in classic Craig kind of doesn't want to make a mistake because he's super pedantic and doesn't want to define things and have people attack him because he missed something, he kind of fumbles. And later on, they ask him what the double straight lines mean, and he pretty perfectly describes the type of notation in C++, the double ORs. But Mellor's judgment basically says, well, Satoshi would have known this, and therefore I'm including this as part of my reasoning for why he's not Satoshi. But if that were the case, number one, Craig did say, well, if I could write it down, and nobody asked him to write it down. So if I was an honest judge, I would have been like, okay, well, I understand that you're a little weird and you like to write things down, and you just said, so write it down for us. Write down what an unsigned integer is. And it's not like he has some means of cheating. So sure, he's sitting right in front of you, have him write it down. And then also the gunning, the kind of cheeky lawyer, arrogant, basically just gives him the answer quickly before he lets him expand on it. So to me, that was really meaningless. Like there wasn't any indication of whether that would prove anything about Craig's knowledge of C++. But also, on top of it, anybody who codes knows that if you go even 6 months, I mean, we learned this in coding school. It's like, keep coding, because if you go 6 months, you start forgetting even the simplest stuff, like how to write a print line and, in perfect syntax. And there's plenty of companies that will have you write things on the board, and then they'll stick it in the computer. If it doesn't work, then you don't get the job. And so you have to be on top of it. And this is a guy who really doesn't touch C++ because he's a chief science officer at his company and doesn't task with writing code. So he has no experience with it for years. So it's very easy to forget. If you gave me a Swift test, which I was extremely good at code puzzles in 2020, it's only 4 years later, and I would struggle to write even one line without syntax errors. So I just think that whole line of, there's so many things in the ruling that are just like that, and in an appeal, you kind of have, it's really an appeal against what the judge says, like everybody's pointing out, David including. You're not going to appeal like what happened in court or the evidence and a lot of the discussion, but you can appeal the way the judge interprets it if there's contradictions. And I think if you're going to use stuff against a man, then you should properly test it. And I think that was Craig's argument in most of the case, which is, okay, so let's assume that you believe everything that Madden wrote. If it wasn't done scientifically, regardless of whether his own forensic auditor was or not, it's just not scientific. And so I think if I totally believe that Copa will try and destroy Craig by filing criminal charges, or at least begging somebody else to file them, the government or whatever. And I think there's a high likelihood of that happening. However, that requires a whole other court case, and that's a criminal case, and the burden of proof is much higher. And I think that will probably backfire on them, because everything that I looked for in the evidence that, not evidence, but in Mellor's report, I don't see how they would tie any of that down, even one forgery. I think, again, pointing back to Mellor's number one reason for assuming that everything else is a forgery or a lie is his
Jack, you disconnected. You're right in the middle of your point. So, or was it me? No, I'm talking. So, all right. Yeah, we lost you, Jack. So, you think what he was recapping was the judgment here and the likelihood of appeal, right? Like, go ahead, Jack, you back? Now go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
sorry.
want to finish your point? We lost you for a moment.
Yeah, I had an incoming call. Sorry. So I think that there is a very large amount of material that he can appeal on, and part of that is just assumptions on the judge, but also the criminal part, I think, can work against Copa because it's going to be a higher burden of proof. And nothing that I saw in the written ruling was convincing enough for me to convict the man, because it's kind of just hearsay. And, Copa has about as good evidence as Craig has. And I would say since Craig, has proven, has demonstrated in so many other ways his knowledge of Bitcoin and all these other things, I just think, and not just that, but his proof of work is rather extensive. So he's got multiple blog articles, multiple things on IT security, many degrees, and I just don't think those things are easily dismissible. They were dismissed by Mehl, but to say that someone's degrees are all fake, which is basically what Mehl implies or says directly in his written judgment, is a little bit nuts. I mean, you're insulting entire universities as witnesses that are liars, and it just, it doesn't make sense. You can call a few people who might have been paid off liars or forgers, and that might make sense in some criminal aspect, but you're looking to call a whole lot of people liars and forgers that are upstanding members of the community. So I just, Mellor's judgment is very unobjective. It's very bent. I can see some of the points in there in terms of like why he wrote them, but again, I just think that there's a huge amount of room for a legitimate appeal, not just an appeal for being able to talk about Bitcoin the rest of your life.
Yeah, so it sounds like in closing here, we could talk about the appeal. If it does happen, it's going to be after the final, like David Pierce said here today, which was pretty objective. It was great to have both sides of the story, of the opinions here on today. Very, very completely opposing sides, and very civil. We didn't have any yelling. It was great. So, and anyways, what he said, that as soon as the judgment comes out on the injunctive relief here, then the appeal timeline will start. So Craig Wright can decide if he's going to appeal. And David said that he doesn't think he will appeal at all because of all the things that are going on with the other cases. Apparently the HoloNot case is now dismissed. He said that the copyright or the database rights case has been dismissed. So I haven't really seen proof of all that, but it looks like there's Mr. Pierce's position is that there's a lot of retreat from Craig Wright. So we'll see if he does appeal.
If he were to win this appeal that he does, would any of those cases be necessary?
Well, not necessarily that they would be necessary. No, it would be that they. Well, what was your question?
Like, if he wins the appeal, wouldn't that kind of like set the tone for any other of those type of cases?
Well, the database rights case for sure would be relevant if he wins on appeal. So if he's dismissed the database rights case, which I don't know, that would be a very valid argument by Mr. Pierce as to a retreat. Because remember, he had that case overturned on appeal already by Justice Miller. That case was overturned on a motion to dismiss. It's back now. So if he's completely dismissed that case on his own merit, it's a valid point. Maybe he won't appeal. I don't know. It's all speculation at this point. We have to see what happens. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, Alex, I think you're pretty close to the knowledge of whether or not he's going to appeal. You said he definitely is, right? From your knowledge?
I'm just working off everyone else's knowledge.
Okay.
If you know Craig's character, it would be a drastic change in everything for him to not appeal.
If he doesn't appeal, then he's risking criminal prosecution. So it's one of those things that, because he's going to be, right now, he's not being prosecuted criminally, but they're going to ask for a referral here. Justice Miller's going to make that in his written ruling on whether or not that he's going to make that referral. Now, he's going to wait for that. If it says a referral in the judgment, well, if he doesn't appeal, he's going to be investigated. If he does appeal and overturns the whole thing, then they wouldn't really have the grounds to investigate him. So it's pretty serious for him to just throw in the towel, I would say. Yeah. All right. So, Crypto Spartacus, you got your hand up.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself by accident. Yeah, I just wanted to throw just kind of my thought at the end here. what I was saying earlier about there's always the potential of the court being corrupt. And if Craig is, I don't know, if he's under the suspicion that he won't be tried fairly, it might not be his intention to actually win at trial or win in the appeal, but rather to expose that he's not actually being tried fairly, so that afterwards he can show that the whole process was set up against him. I mean, I'm always open to the opposite being true, that, I don't know, maybe he's just lied to people to advance big block Bitcoin, but that doesn't really seem to make sense. I don't think he's the type of person who would do that. It doesn't fit with his character. Just, it would be really weird for someone like Craig to just lie about all of this. And it's hard to, I don't know, it's just hard for me to suspect that he's just a scammer. And it seems like he has some sort of definitive plan where he understands the way the legal system works, and he's made promises that he would provide irrefutable evidence. So, I mean, I would just wait and see. I want to wait and see how he responds, because, I mean, he's made promises that he's going to provide irrefutable proof, and it might be the case that he's waiting to get an unfair trial over with before he presents that, because that's never really how he wanted to present his evidence. So, I don't know. I'm always a wait and see kind of person. I just wanted to throw out my last 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Crypto Spartacus. I love it. Don't everybody go out and check out Ruth's book as well. We talked about it last time. The Bitcoin Singularity. You know, it's a great little read. I got like 3 or 4 chapters into it. It's nice, nonfiction, very descriptive, images, beautiful, beautiful book. So, you know, it's very it's a great little read. You know, a non-person just who likes to read. I'm sorry, fiction, not nonfiction. And it's on Amazon. So that's any last comments there before we motion to close this? I think we got some thumbs up, and if anybody you know, we can. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll do a mastermind show next week on Wednesday for sure. We'll have something on Wednesday at 9. I think it's was it 8:30 or so? I don't remember what time I'm doing it on Sunday, but I'll post it. So let's do it. This is really informative, and I appreciate everybody for joining in. I'm going to motion that we close up. Okay.
Just one last time. I
Yeah.
didn't see any thumbs up about if people want to have an after space for this space. So I guess that's kind of last chance for people to show if they want to continue talking. Okay. Okay. Okay, I will open an after space.
Mila, thank you. All right, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and end, everybody. Thank you for joining. I will end the video and the recording there. We'll put it on YouTube as well for anybody who can share this recording, share the video out there after you see it, and get the word out there so we can hear a pretty two-sided position here on this case today. I think it was pretty well balanced. Having Mr. Pierce on was very, very helpful. So yeah, all right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at the top. All right. We'll see you next time.